Relationship regulation theory is a modern anthropological and psychological theory developed by Allan, Fiske, and a variety of his collaborators. It's something that tries to analyze human social interactions, and it says that norms, moral norms, but also more broadly, norms of social interaction, whether we'd really consider them part of ethics, part of etiquette, part of just general scripts that we use for various kinds of social interactions, all of these fall under four main headings, or can be viewed as combinations of elements that fall under four main headings. There are four basic models of human interaction, and we understand our interactions with other people according to those four models. Our social life consists largely of making relationships with other people, maintaining those relationships, adjusting them, and in general trying to contribute to the health of those relationships. What is ethics all about? From this point of view, it's about maintaining those social relationships, about establishing them, about keeping them healthy, about keeping them stable, and when they have to end, about what to do, about transformations, transitions, and finally terminations of such relationships. So if this is right, then norms of an ethical kind or of other kinds are really about facilitating social relationships, about enabling us to get along together, to form relationships with individual people and as parts of groups. Here is how Fiske puts it. The relational models theory explains social life as a process of seeking, making, sustaining, repairing, adjusting, judging, construing, and sanctioning relationships. It postulates that people are oriented to relationships as such, that people generally want to relate to each other, feel committed to basic types of relationships, regard themselves as obligated to abide by them, and impose them on other people, including third parties. There are a number of basic assumptions, then, to this theory, relationship models theory, or sometimes called relationship regulation theory. The key idea is this: people are fundamentally sociable, and we organize our social life in terms of relationships with other people. We do that using these four basic relational models. They are the schemata that we use to construct, maintain, and govern relationships. We interact with other people in order to have relationships with them, and since those relationships fall into these four kinds, the idea is that we organize our social relations, our interactions with other people, in order to form and maintain social relationships of these various kinds. These are universal. The way in which they're expressed varies from culture to culture, but they are found in every culture. Indeed, in every culture, it seems as if people organize their social lives according to these four models. So they seem to be universal. They seem to be endogenous products of the human mind, as Fiske puts it. They seem to be innate in us, structures in terms of which we interpret our social interactions. The first model, the most basic model in a way, is communal sharing. It is seeing ourselves as part of a group, but the members of the group as being undifferentiated, as being all equal, if I can put it that way, though equality is not yet really part of the conceptual repertoire. We simply view ourselves as members of the group. The responsibilities of the group are collective responsibilities. Everybody contributes without really keeping track of who is contributing what. The goods attained by the group, the benefits, those too are viewed as collective. The group has collective accomplishments. They are viewed as accomplishments of the group. They are not assigned to particular people on the basis of contributions. Nobody really keeps track of who is accomplishing what, who deserves what, who has what responsibility, or anything of that kind. The group is simply trying to accomplish certain tasks, and people contribute as members of the group. So we treat all members of the group as equivalent. Trivially, I suppose, each person's relationship with themselves is such a relationship. It's a communal sharing relationship with the self, but also intimate love relationships tend to be like this, romantic relationships, relationships within a nuclear family. And then you can have these at a variety of levels. You could have a more extended family. You can have the community, the neighborhood. You could have a particular community, like a religious community. You could have the city, the county, the state, the country. All of these could be viewed as communal sharing relationships, at least for certain purposes. Some of this may vary by function. One group may view themselves as in it altogether with respect to certain functions, but may assign particular responsibilities for other kinds of functions. The key idea here, however, is that people share. They share responsibilities, they share benefits, they share the goods, they share material objects, they share a variety of things in this relationship. There is no real division observed among the various people. Things are viewed as owned jointly, or responsibilities as owed jointly. The only thing that really matters is membership in the set, and so people focus on what they have in common. They view themselves as having a lot in common, and that is a sort of grounding for their membership in the group. It is also grounding for their sharing of the goods and the responsibilities. The second kind of social organization, the second model of relationships, is authority ranking. There, people view themselves as linearly ordered. Some people are higher in the hierarchy, some people are lower in the hierarchy. And so what matters is being above or below a given person. Now, in a communal sharing relationship, there's no concern for this. It's all for one and one for all. But in an authority ranking relationship, there are certain people who have a higher rank, certain people have a lower rank. There are different responsibilities that go along with these. So people at a higher level, for example, deserve respect. They have a certain level of prestige and privilege, but they also have responsibilities to those below them, to nurture them, to protect them. The people below have obligations to respect those above, respect their privileges, respect their right to a larger share of whatever the group has, but also owe them a significant debt of obedience. The people above in the hierarchy get to control certain aspects, at least, of what the people lower in the hierarchy do. The third model is equality matching. People in an equality matching relationship are concerned with maintaining a certain balance, a certain level of equality. And so there is a concern here that some people might have more, that some people might have less. There's a desire to seek balance, to compensate for this. So there's an attempt to get back to a state where everybody is the same, everybody has the same amount. A good example of this might be within a friendship, where people try to observe equality by taking turns, for example, or having equal amounts, a sharing sort of relationship, where people here, in contrast to a communal sharing relationship, actually do divide people's shares, but are concerned that those shares be equal. Another example might be a carpool, where people are expected to share equally the responsibilities of driving. There might be other kinds of relationships, peers within a working group, for example, where people are expected to have roughly equal salaries and equal responsibilities. In a market pricing relationship, the fourth model, people are concerned with ratios, with proportions. So it's called market pricing because many of our economic and business relationships are like this. People are concerned with questions like how much of this for how much of that. Now, that can happen also in an equality matching relationship because there we're concerned to maintain equality and people are concerned with balance. So maybe, yes, you drive a few more times in the carpool, but I pay a little more for gas. So there is a certain comparison of goods of various kinds. But that becomes much more extensive, in fact, becomes the foundation of a market pricing relationship. People are concerned with the proportion of one kind of good and a proportion of another kind of good. So a good example might be people who have shares in a company, for example. Ownership of the shares is supposed to correspond to proportions of benefits. Within a company, it may well be that people have different shares of ownership and their responsibilities, but also their rewards are supposed to be proportional to their share of the ownership. Different kinds of organizations allow different models to be primary. Almost every organization has some kind of combination of these if it attains any size. But often a startup will have more communal sharing model, and individual working groups within a larger organization might have a communal sharing model. People aren't very concerned with who does what task. They're simply collective tasks to be done, collective responsibilities, and then collective rewards to be gained as a result of all that. People are viewed simply as partners in the joint enterprise, and the concern is with the joint effort and the joint rewards. In an authority-ranking relationship, which tends to emerge once a group attains a certain size and complexity, some people are viewed as having a higher status than others. They get a bigger office, they get a bigger salary, they get to give orders and manage things, deciding how various things are going to be allocated. But also, they have a responsibility, not only to the group as a whole, to the organization, but also to the people who work for them, to their subordinates. Within any organization, there may be some elements of an equality matching model. People within the same level of the organization may view themselves as peers, and so view themselves as governed by equality matching, an attempt to keep a rough balance, roughly equal balance among the various people at the same level. That can happen at all sorts of different levels: the size of offices, position of offices, windows, all sorts of aspects of things in an organization can become concerned for equality matching where people are at the same level. Some organizations may have mostly an equality matching model where people are viewed as equal partners in the enterprise, each having their own individual tasks, but all those tasks being viewed as equal in merit and equal in responsibility. Finally, organizations may be organized primarily according to a market pricing model where there is not a sort of personal element to these relationships. It's simply a question of proportion. In fact, the more, you might say, the organization outsources things, the more it's moving to this kind of market pricing model. You don't really concern yourself with how big the contractors' offices are at their locations and so on. Your main concern is simply their contribution to you and paying them in proportion to their contribution. And so people within an organization often resist being reduced to a mere market pricing model. But to the extent that things are outsourced, or to the extent that an organization grows enough that you don't really have any personal relationship with people in other parts of the organization, a market pricing model becomes primary. When I've surveyed graduate students about key ethical questions that they've faced in organizations, they say things like this: firing someone for an honest mistake, or having a bad person doing a good job for the organization. Who gets to decide on various kinds of questions? Somebody in the end has to make a decision. How is that decision reached, and who gets to reach it? On the basis of what are people promoted? What's the role of achievement, of merit, as opposed to who knows who, a level of cronyism? It might be nepotism in certain kinds of family-run organizations, but it might simply be a question of friendships and other kinds of social relationships interacting with business relationships in various ways. There can be a concern in general about the role of personal relationships, the degree to which one should be impartial, and the degree to which trust in individual people, knowledge of their competence, is relevant in a business connection. After all, you might say, look, it's not just because that person's my friend that I back them for this position. It's partly because I know them well. I know their strengths, I know their weaknesses, and I have confidence that they can do this. Another person I don't have the same relationship with, so I don't have the same grounds for confidence. I simply don't have as much information. And so, to what extent is that legitimate, and to what extent does that become a rationalization of a kind of personal bias? To what extent should management and staff play by different rules, be governed by different rules? Should the same rules apply to everybody in the organization? What kinds of differences does it make if you're at different positions within the organization? You can see, I hope, in thinking about these kinds of questions that emerge, that a lot of them have to do not just with how a certain relational model gets implemented, but often which kind of relationship model is relevant here. Is this really an authority ranking model? Is it a question of communal sharing? Is it equality matching? Often within organizations, there's a kind of hierarchy, but there's been an attempt to flatten a lot of organizations, to do away with a lot of hierarchies. But hierarchies tend to emerge. And so there is a sort of complicated balancing that goes on. Fiske stresses that many real relationships are combinations of these models, and the same thing is true within organizations. A lot of relationships within organizations are combinations of communal sharing with respect to certain things, authority ranking with respect to certain others, equality matching with respect to certain others, and which aspect is governed by which relational model is often unclear. Many of those questions, I hope you can see, revolve around that sort of problem. What exactly is governed by which relational model?